Just a nurse. That was what Dr. Pierce called her in the hallway outside Trauma Bay 3, his voice loud enough for the residents to hear, casual enough that it sounded almost affectionate. Ashley Cooper didn't flinch. She was restocking the crash cart with 14-gauge angiocath needles, her hands moving with the precision of someone who had done this 10,000 times, and she simply registered the comment the way she registered the fluorescent hum overhead: information, data, noise. The residents laughed. She didn't look up. She had arrived at St. Michael's in Denver 6 months ago with a nursing license, a reference letter from a clinic in Montana that no longer existed, and the kind of composure that made people trust her before they knew her name. Within 3 weeks, patients started asking for her by name. Within 2 months, the critical care staff had begun deferring to her instincts on timing and dosages in ways that made the attending physicians uncomfortable. Dr. Pierce noticed this immediately. He noticed everything about Ashley Cooper except the things that actually mattered. The emergency department of St. Michael's moved with the controlled chaos of a place that had learned to save lives in 30-second windows. The rotor wash from Life Flight shook the glass doors every 4 minutes on average. The ventilators hummed their mechanical rhythm like a chorus of sleeping dragons. Ashley moved through the space with the kind of quiet efficiency that made people forget she was there until they needed her, at which point she had already anticipated what they would ask for. Trauma shears hung from her left hip pocket. She kept her hair in a bun so tight it pulled the skin at her temples. She never raised her voice. She never had to. Dr. Pierce, by contrast, moved through the department like a man who believed the room would rearrange itself around his presence. He was 47, silver at the temples, the kind of tall that made him check every doorway. His family had money, old money, the kind that bought a medical degree and then kept buying, generation after generation. His father had been a surgeon at Johns Hopkins. His grandfather before that. Dr. Pierce had learned early that excellence was optional if you were born excellent, and he had learned to despise people who seemed to excel without the same genetic advantage. When Ashley had corrected him 3 weeks ago, quietly, in front of the patient's wife, suggesting that a dosage was slightly high for a 71-year-old with diminished renal function, something in Dr. Pierce had fractured. Not obviously. Not visibly. But the next time she was in the break room, he was there, casually mentioning to 2 residents that her credentials seemed somewhat expedited, that she had come from a clinic that didn't appear in any medical directory, that it was curious how quickly she had integrated into a level 1 trauma center without the usual rigorous vetting. He said it like he was making conversation. He said it like he cared about the integrity of their department. What he meant was, you are not supposed to be here. By week 4, the rumor had evolved. Ashley had falsified her background. Ashley had never worked in critical care, only med-surg, only urgent care, definitely not in anything requiring the kind of precision she displayed. Ashley was sleeping with someone in human resources. Ashley had family money and was just playing nurse like a hobby. The rumors moved through the department like a virus, and they were potent precisely because Ashley never defended herself. She arrived early. She stayed late. She touched the small folded flag she kept in her locker, thin fabric, the color of old blood, and then she went to work. The flag was from a different life. The flag was from someone named Jenkins, a Marine Corpsman she had carried out of a Phi base outside Bagram 14 years ago, and it had taken 6 months of strings being pulled by people whose names weren't in any directory to get it sent to the address she had given. She didn't talk about Jenkins. She didn't talk about Bagram. She didn't talk about the fact that she was not, technically, Ashley Cooper, that had been her middle name, her mother's maiden name, and it had become her entire identity the day the military had erased Captain Ashley Cooper from all classified records and ordered her to disappear. So she moved through St. Michael's as though she had always been there, as though she had never been anywhere else, and she let Dr. Pierce spread his rumors like he was performing a service. It was 2:24 p.m. on a Wednesday when the paralyzed veteran arrived. The ambulance pulled up to the bay with its lights dark, non-emergent transport, which meant the paramedics had failed to recognize what Ashley's eyes caught in exactly 1.3 seconds, the slight blue tint at his lips, the way his nostrils flared with the effort of breathing, the rise and fall of his chest that was too fast, too shallow, too desperate. For hours in the hallway had not been a wait. It had been a slow suffocation, official and invisible. His name was Marcus Webb. He was 34 years old, a former captain in the Army Special Forces, and he had a complete spinal injury at T4 from a roadside improvised explosive device that had taken both his legs and most of his feeling from the nipple line down. He was paralyzed but not dead, not yet, and he was alone. The transport note said his sister had gone home to get his daughter from school. The transport note said he had been stable the entire 4 hours. The transport note was a lie. Ashley was in the break room when she saw him through the window, saw the way his chest was working, saw the beginning stages of respiratory distress. She set down her coffee, cooling, untouched, exactly where it had been for 16 minutes, and started moving. Not quickly. Not in any way that would draw attention. Just moving toward the patient bays with the kind of purpose that looked like routine. Dr. Pierce was ahead of her, reviewing a chart. He looked up as she passed, his expression shifting from professional to something darker, something with an edge. "He's got a transport sheet," he said. "Stable vitals." The medics would have flagged respiratory distress. Ashley did not break stride. Medics miss things. So do nurses. She stopped. This was the moment where she was supposed to defend herself, where she was supposed to engage, where she was supposed to give him the satisfaction of a response. Instead, she simply held his gaze for 1.8 seconds, long enough for him to see that the deferential mask was still perfectly in place, long enough for him to feel the weight of something underneath that mask that he could not quite name, and then she continued to the patient bay. The veteran was in Trauma 5, lying on a gurney with his powerful upper body uncovered, his chest marked with the thin scars of old deployments, his lungs working at a pace that should have been generating alarm. Ashley pulled the curtain closed behind her with a soft metallic whisper and approached the bed. "Captain Webb." She used his rank like a key, watching to see if it would open any doors in his eyes. His head turned toward her voice. His eyes were dark brown, flat with exhaustion and something that looked like resignation. "Just Webb now," he said. His breathing was labored, each word interrupted by the effort. "No rank. No service. Just Webb." She had learned long ago that the worst lies people tell themselves are the ones that sound like truth. She didn't argue. She began her assessment with the mechanical precision of someone who had done this 10,000 times, checking the chart, verifying the admission notes, finding the 4-hour timestamp. 4 hours. 70 men had passed through this department in 4 hours. 70 small crises and 4 large ones, and one captain who was slowly drowning in a hallway where everyone could see him and no one was looking. His oxygen saturation was 89%. Normal was 95 to 100. Below 90 was the boundary where a patient's organs began to fail, cell by cell, in an order of precedence, brain first, heart second, everything else after. The pulse oximeter on his finger had been alarming quietly the entire time, beep, 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 a metronome counting down to something irreversible. "When was the last time you were suctioned?" Ashley asked. "Hour. Maybe longer." He tried to lift his head. "Can't move my arms down. Spinal cord's gone at T4, Anne." "I know," she said, and something in the way she said it made him stop talking. She knew. He looked at her with sudden intensity, his eyes tracking her movements as she reached for the suction catheter, her hands moving with the kind of muscle memory that belonged to someone who had done this not just in hospitals but in places where there was no electricity, no backup, just hands and tools and the difference between alive and dead. His breathing eased slightly, just from knowing that she knew. And that was when his eyes changed. Not in any dramatic way, and no tears, no shock, just a subtle shift in his pupils, a focusing of recognition that couldn't quite reach consciousness. He watched her hands. He watched the line of her jaw. He watched the way she positioned herself with her back to the ventilator so he could see her mouth moving, so he could read her lips if his hearing started to fail. Something in his face said, "I know you." Something else said, "I don't. I can't." Ashley's hands did not tremble. Her voice did not crack. She simply moved to the oxygen controls, checking the delivery rate, noting the settings, preparing the next intervention while the beeping of his failing saturation filled the space between them like a countdown. The hallway outside Trauma Bay 3 smelled like antiseptic and fear. Captain Marcus Webb lay on a gurney, his paralyzed frame wrapped in hospital linens, his breathing shallow and increasingly labored. The oxygen saturation monitor displayed 89% and falling with methodical indifference. His wife, Jennifer, stood gripping the side rail with both hands, her knuckles the color of old ivory. Their teenage son, Marcus Jr., stood beside her, 14 years old with his father's chin and his mother's eyes, watching the numbers on the monitor as if he could will them upward through sheer attention. That was when Dr. Pierce emerged from the physician station, his white coat billowing slightly as he walked, his stethoscope draped around his neck like a badge of dominion. He saw Ashley approaching the patient's bedside with the quiet efficiency she brought to every interaction, her hands already reaching to check the oxygen tubing, to assess the delivery rate, to do what nurses had done for a century before anyone gave them official permission. "Nurse Cooper." His voice cut through the ambient hospital noise like a scalpel through silk. Not a greeting. A summons. Ashley paused. Her hands remained steady. Her face remained a study in neutral composure, but Dr. Pierce had become expert at reading what didn't show. He was looking for the flinch. The hesitation. The moment when hierarchy reasserted itself. "Yes, doctor," she said, turning to face him. Her voice was soft. It was always soft. That was part of what infuriated him, the refusal to escalate, to meet his volume with volume, to give him the satisfaction of a confrontation he could later describe as unprofessional. "I'm wondering where you received your medical degree." He stepped closer, angling his body so that Jennifer and Marcus Jr. had a clear sightline to his performance. This was deliberate. This was calculated. Because it seems you've been making clinical assessments without authorization. Again. The monitor beeped. Once. Twice. The oxygen saturation had dropped to 87%. "I was checking the oxygen delivery system," Ashley said. Still soft. Still measured. Without asking. Dr. Pierce's voice rose now, pitched to carry down the hallway, pitched to be heard by the nursing staff at the station 30 feet away. "Where did you get your MD, Ashley? A Cracker Jack box? Because last time I checked, oxygen rates are a physician's decision. Not a nurse's guess." He turned to Jennifer and Marcus Jr. with the expression of a man explaining a simple concept to children. "Your husband is in good hands. Medical hands. Professional hands. Not just nursing." Ashley could see the way Marcus Jr.'s jaw tightened. Could see the way Jennifer's grip on the rail intensified. Could see Marcus Webb's eyes track her face with that same fragmented recognition, the same struggle to place where he knew her from, as if his brain was searching through files that had been sealed and classified 7 years ago. She said nothing. Her jaw clenched once, a single involuntary muscle contraction that lasted less than a second. After that, her face returned to its default state, composed, unreactive, the face of someone absorbing a blow and letting it pass through her without leaving a mark. "You're reassigned," Dr. Pierce continued. "Bedpan duty on for until end of shift. I'll take it from here. I'm the doctor. I actually have credentials." Ashley turned and walked away. The hallway stretched before her like a gauntlet. At the nursing station, 3 nurses suddenly became very interested in their computers. One of them, a woman named Sandra who had worked at St. Michael's for 9 years, watched Ashley pass and muttered something to her colleague. The words were quiet but deliberate, "Credential faker." Ashley's stride didn't change. Her shoulders didn't tense. She simply kept moving, her footsteps clicking against the tile floor in a rhythm that suggested someone who had learned long ago that the most dangerous thing you could do was appear wounded. 2 hours later, she sat alone in the break room with a cup of coffee that had gone cold. The break room was small, windowless, with a refrigerator that hummed in a minor key and a microwave that smelled permanently of popcorn. She held the coffee cup with both hands, not to drink it but to have something to hold, some small object that required her focus. 3 nurses entered. They were mid-shift, probably on their 15-minute break. They stopped when they saw her. Their expressions shifted, the subtle recalibration of people who had been told a story by someone in authority and had chosen to believe it. One of them, a younger nurse named Tyler who had been friendly with Ashley just a week ago, exchanged a glance with the others. They turned to leave without speaking. As they passed, Tyler muttered something just loud enough for Ashley to hear, "Better check her credentials before she touches your patient." The other two laughed quietly. Small, cruel sounds. Ashley's hand tightened on the coffee cup until her knuckles went white, the tendons in her forearm standing out like bridge cables. But her face remained perfectly still. Not a twitch. Not a flush of color. Not the slightest indication that the words had landed, that they had found their target, that they were meant to wound and had succeeded in that intention. She released the cup before the ceramic could crack. Took a measured breath. Drank the cold coffee without tasting it. This was what she had signed up for when she accepted the reassignment to civilian life. This was the price of the new identity, the price of disappearing, the price of being Captain Ashley Cooper, a woman who had led 12 soldiers through the gate outside Bagram, who had counted them in and counted them out, whose decisions had saved lives and whose omissions had cost them, being reduced to just a nurse without the right to protect even a single patient. That afternoon, during the shift change when maximum staff would be present, Dr. Pierce walked to the unit board in red marker in hand. The board was where staffing assignments were posted, where birth announcements were celebrated, where the hospital's pulse could be felt in dry erase updates and administrative notices. He wrote in letters large enough to be read from 10 feet away, A. Cooper, unauthorized patient contact, written warning number 3. He underlined it twice. The red marker squeaked against the board with a sound like fingernails on slate. Staff members paused what they were doing to watch. Some pretended not to notice. Some looked directly at Ashley, who stood at the far end of the hallway, and then looked away quickly, as if eye contact might constitute conspiracy. The message was clear. Dr. Pierce had given his assessment of her credibility, and the institution, signified by the board, by the red marker, by the official notation, was validating it. Ashley registered this with the part of her brain that had been trained to absorb tactical information, to catalogue threats, to map the social architecture of her environment. But she didn't move. Didn't approach. Didn't defend herself. From his gurney in the hallway, Marcus Webb watched the entire scene. His oxygen saturation alarm had been silenced, which meant someone had adjusted the threshold rather than addressing the underlying problem, a choice that in military terms was called shooting the messenger. His breathing had become visibly labored now. His neck veins were beginning to distend, the telltale sign of increased intrathoracic pressure, the harbinger of something that would kill him within the hour if no one intervened. His wife was asking questions that no one was answering. His son was staring at his father's face with the specific terror of watching someone die in installments. And then, 20 minutes later, Ashley approached again. She moved toward the veteran's bedside with the same quiet efficiency she brought to every task, her eyes assessing, her hand steady, her mind already 3 steps ahead of what her body was doing. Dr. Pierce intercepted her before she reached the gurney. He positioned himself between Ashley and the patient like a checkpoint, like a border guard, like a man enforcing a law that only he had the authority to create. "Touch my patient and I'll have your license," he said. His voice was low now but carrying an edge like a blade run along stone. "Oh wait, do you even have one?" He waited. He was waiting for the moment when she would break, when she would argue back, when she would give him the confrontation he could later weaponize into a complaint of insubordination. He had spent months poisoning the staff against her, spreading rumors, building a narrative. All he needed now was her to confirm it, to demonstrate that she was unstable, that she couldn't handle being corrected, that she was exactly the kind of loose cannon who shouldn't be trusted with any patient's care. The oxygen saturation monitor continued its descent. 84% now. The veteran's left chest wall was rising in isolation, a unilateral rise that indicated the left lung was overexpanding, that pressure was building somewhere in his thoracic cavity, that physics was becoming destiny. Ashley stared at Dr. Pierce with eyes like winter water. Her jaw was clenched, but the rest of her face was a mirror held up to absolute composure. And then, in a voice like ice over steel, a voice that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than her throat, from some interior coordinate where authority and certainty lived, she said, "Your ego is louder than his Strider, but only one of those will be mentioned at the M&M conference." She turned and walked away. Not hurriedly. Not as if she was fleeing. She walked as if she had simply completed a sentence and was moving on to the next task, which was what made it devastating. Dr. Pierce's face flushed red, not the blush of embarrassment but the crimson of humiliation, the color of a man watching his hierarchy dissolve in real time in front of staff witnesses. Behind Ashley, the veteran's oxygen saturation alarm began to chime. A steady electronic beeping that no one could ignore anymore. The numbers were dropping through the 80s like an elevator descending into basement levels. Jennifer gripped her husband's hand tighter. Marcus Jr.'s face had gone pale. And Captain Marcus Webb, whose name was known to exactly 3 people on the planet and who had been waiting for hours in a hallway to be noticed, watched Ashley disappear around the corner while his lungs struggled to expand and the room seemed to tilt around him like a ship in a storm. His neck veins distended like rope pulled tight across his throat. Captain Marcus Webb's head tilted back against the stretcher, and Ashley saw it immediately, the trachea deviating to the left, the accessory muscles working overtime, his chest rising but no air moving. The monitors sang their alarm. O2 sat 82% and dropping. His wife screamed something Ashley couldn't hear over the high-pitched beeping, her hands reaching for him, for anyone, for help. Dr. Pierce stood at the bedside adjusting the oxygen mask to 100% non-rebreather. Standard protocol. Useless protocol. The mask was suffocation when what Marcus needed was the pressure inside his chest cavity to equalize, when air had accumulated in the space between his lung and his ribs and nowhere to go but inward, collapsing the entire right hemithorax like a fist closing around a balloon. Tension pneumothorax. The kind of diagnosis that killed soldiers in Helmand Province and would kill him here in Denver if nobody recognized what was happening. Ashley's hands moved without permission from her brain. Muscle memory took over, the kind that belonged to someone who had performed emergency needle decompression on the floor of a Chinook at 3,000 feet with rounds passing through the fuselage. She knew that clinical sign the way she knew her own heartbeat. She had seen it in Sanjin Valley. She had treated it outside Bagram. She had saved lives with this procedure when it was the difference between breathing and drowning in your own collapsed lung. The monitor screamed. 78%. Call CT surgery, Dr. Pierce commanded into his phone, his voice steady, clinical, all wrong. Probable pneumothorax. Patient deteriorating despite supplemental oxygen. ETA to the OR. He listened. His jaw tightened. 20 minutes is too long. Get them now. Marcus's eyes found Ashley's. Just for a second. Just long enough for her to see the thing soldiers see when they're about to die, not fear, but recognition. The look that says you know me. You've done this before. You saved people like me before. Ashley moved to the crash cart. Where are you going? Dr. Pierce's voice had the edge of a blade. Step back from that cart, Cooper. She didn't step back. Her hands were already moving, reaching for the 14-gauge needle, the betadine swab, muscle memory riding her like a ghost. The movements were automatic, precise, the kind of automatic that only came from muscle fibers remembering things the brain had tried to forget. Bagram. Sanjin. A medevac landing zone where blood in the sand meant somebody's medic had to move fast or somebody's family got a folded flag and a 3-volley salute. I said step away from that cart. Dr. Pierce's voice rose. He was moving toward her, his presence expanding to fill the bay. You are not authorized for that procedure. That is a physician intervention. You touch that needle and I will have security remove you from this hospital. Ashley lifted her eyes to his. Not defiant. Not angry. Just looking at him the way a person looks at something in their way. Her voice dropped, not loud, just clear. His lung is collapsing. We have 20 minutes. 18 now. And no. You will not. She turned from him. Dr. Pierce's face went red. Not the flush of exertion. The color of a man watching his authority dissolve in real time. His hand came up like he might grab her. Instead, he stopped, remembering they had an audience. His wife. Their child standing in the corner. 2 RNs frozen at the monitors. The code team assembling outside the bay doors. All of them watching Ashley Cooper, the nurse with the falsified credentials and the bad attitude and the insubordination record, move toward a patient with the kind of certainty that looked like it belonged in an operating room. She palpated his second rib, found the space below it, the second intercostal space, midclavicular line. The anatomy burned into her from 1,000 hours of training and a dozen real procedures performed in conditions that would make this sterile bay look like a surgery suite. Her fingers marked the spot. She swabbed the area with betadine in a circle, the antiseptic smell rising sharp and chemical, cutting through the noise and fear like a smell that meant someone knew what they were doing. Like a smell that meant survival. If you perform that procedure without physician authorization, I will report this as assault. That is criminal. That is license termination. Dr. Pierce's voice had lost its authority. He was threatening because he had nothing else. The needle was already in her hand. Marcus's wife made a sound, not quite a scream, not quite a prayer. His daughter's hands covered her mouth. Ashley's hands were steady as a surgeon's. She positioned the needle perpendicular to the skin, felt the give as it entered, first the skin, then the subcutaneous tissue, then the fascia. The sensation of breaking through the chest wall membrane. And then the release. The hiss filled the room like air escaping from a tomb. Like pressure so ancient and terrible finally finding its exit. The sound of a lung re-expanding. The sound of a man getting to breathe again. Marcus's chest expanded visibly. The accessory muscles stopped their frantic work. His color shifted from blue-gray to something approaching human. His wife gasped and reached for his hand. His daughter's shoulders dropped like someone had removed an anvil. The monitor beeped, 84%. 87%. 91%. Dr. Pierce went silent for exactly 3 seconds. Then he pulled out his phone. I'm documenting this as an authorized practice of medicine. His fingers moved fast, photographing the needle in place, Ashley's gloved hand still stabilizing it, the procedure tray with its open sterile field. His voice had shifted, no longer authority, but evidence gathering. Every witness in this bay. Every moment. He was building a file now. Building a case. His phone became a weapon. He stepped to the corner and dialed. His voice dropped but Ashley heard every word. Chief of Staff. Dr. Pierce. We have a nurse who just performed a needle decompression without physician authorization. I need hospital risk management down here immediately. This is a scope of practice violation with potential criminal implications. He listened to the response. His jaw tightened. Yes. Now. The next voice through the intercom was CT surgery. Bringing your unstable pneumo to the OR. ETA 8 minutes. Dr. Pierce's face hardened. 8 minutes meant the patient was stable enough to move. 8 minutes meant his protocol, the ineffective protocol, had been supplanted by Ashley's field medicine. 8 minutes meant he'd been wrong while she'd been right, and every person in this bay knew it. He paged hospital risk management again. Then he began collecting statements. He moved to the first RN, a woman named Janet who Ashley knew had family who owed Dr. Pierce favors, loans he'd personally covered, debts he'd forgiven, the kind of accumulated leverage that bought loyalty. Janet's eyes darted between Ashley and the doctor. When he asked what she saw, her voice came out small. She just went to the cart. He didn't authorize it. The second RN, Marcus's wife, was still crying with relief and gratitude, but when Dr. Pierce approached her with his phone recording, her expression shifted. Did Nurse Cooper have a physician's order for that procedure? Marcus's wife looked at Ashley. Something flickered across her face, gratitude warring with fear, the understanding that helping Ashley now meant going against the powerful man with the phone and the authority to make complaints. "No," she whispered. "He didn't order it." Dr. Pierce's smile was thin. He had his witnesses. He had his documentation. He had his narrative. CT surgery wheeled in 4 minutes later, a surgical team moving with purpose, the kind of precision that came from knowing they were coming to collect a live patient instead of a dead one. The moment they saw the needle in place, saw the improved vital signs, saw a 78% O2 sat climbing toward 94%, their eyes found Ashley. Who did the decompression? The surgeon was already assessing the placement, palpating the needle position, his expression shifting from concern to something like respect. "I did," Ashley said. She was still stabilizing the needle with her gloved hand, her other arm extended protectively near Marcus's chest as the team prepared to move him. The surgeon nodded, the kind of nod that meant he'd seen field medicine before, understood the training it required, recognized the difference between protocol and survival. "Good placement. Clean technique. You probably saved his life." Dr. Pierce stepped forward. She also violated hospital policy for point 7.2 regarding scope of practice. This procedure required physician authorization, and she proceeded without consent. "I'm filing a formal incident report." The surgeon looked at him for a long moment. Then back at Ashley. Then at the monitor showing oxygen saturation climbing toward normal. Then back at Dr. Pierce with an expression that said he'd made his medical judgment and it had nothing to do with hospital policy. They moved Marcus out of the bay, the surgical team flowing around him like water around a stone, the monitors still showing improved vitals, the hiss of the needle still echoing in the room. Ashley's gloved hand dropped. The moment she released the needle, she released everything, the composure, the military bearing, the presence that had filled the room moments before. Dr. Pierce was already typing on his phone. Already building his case. Already moving through the hospital's political architecture like a man who understood exactly which doors to knock on and what threats to make. Within 20 minutes, he'd submitted his formal incident report to hospital risk management. Within 30, he'd filed a supplemental complaint with the chief of staff citing a dangerous autonomy and egregious scope violations. Within 40, he'd collected his witness statements and submitted them as supporting documentation. But that wasn't the worst part. Not even close. The worst part came at 18:47 hours when a security guard appeared at the nursing station and asked to speak with Ashley privately. The worst part came when he escorted her to the employee exit without explanation. The worst part came when she realized she wasn't suspended pending investigation, she was terminated, effective immediately, her badge deactivated, her access revoked, her presence at St. Michael's erased as completely as if she'd never existed in those hallways at all. The paperwork took him 3 hours. Dr. Pierce worked alone in his office, door locked, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like wasps trapped in a jar. He photographed every page of the incident report, policy 4.7.2, scope of practice violations, gross negligence, unauthorized medical intervention, his printer humming through page after page after page. 37 pages. Color-coded tabs. Cross-reference citations. The precision of it was beautiful to him, the way bureaucracy could accomplish what confrontation never could. He didn't need to raise his voice. He just needed to make her disappear on paper. The witness statements came next. He'd already called 3 nurses, already promised them schedule flexibility in exchange for their signatures. They were afraid of him, which made them useful. Maria from Trauma Bay 2 wrote that Ashley had overstepped her authority and ignored direct medical orders. Thomas from ICU documented that she had access to restricted medications and falsified patient charts. Nobody mentioned that Maria owed her rent to a predatory loan shark and desperately needed the schedule change. Nobody mentioned that Thomas was terrified of losing his job to budget cuts. The statements were lies bound in administrative language, lies that looked like truth under fluorescent light. Dr. Pierce crafted the formal complaint at 11 p.m., fingers clicking across his keyboard with the confidence of a man who'd spent decades weaponizing institutional power. It is with grave concern that I submit this report regarding Ashley Cooper, RN, whose dangerous autonomy and willful disregard for physician authority represents an immediate and ongoing threat to patient safety at St. Michael's Medical Center. 14 paragraphs. Triple-spaced. Every sentence a nail. He referenced hospital policy for 0.727 times, each reference building toward an inevitable conclusion: she had to go. Not suspended. Not investigated. Terminated. He submitted the formal complaint to the Chief of Staff at 5:12 p.m., carbon copy to the hospital board chair, the risk management director, and 3 board members he'd cultivated with donations and favors over the years. In the subject line, he wrote, "Urgent, immediate suspension required, patient safety risk." He hit send and leaned back in his chair, listening to the silence of the empty administrative wing at dusk. No more witnesses now. No more messy confrontations. Just the grinding machinery of institutional death, turning slowly, inevitably, crushing everything beneath its wheels. She'd be gone by morning. Ashley sat at her kitchen table at 6:08 p.m., still in scrubs, the fabric damp with her own sweat and someone else's blood from the ICU. The house was quiet except for the refrigerator's mechanical wheeze. On the table in front of her sat the folded flag, small, triangular, the stars and stripes folded the ceremonial way, presented to her on the worst day of her life with words she'd forgotten to listen to because her mind was already gone, already following the helicopter that lifted off without her. Sergeant Marcus Chen. 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines. Dark Horse Company. 24 years old. He'd been laughing at Chow about something his girlfriend said in his last letter. She reached out and touched the flag with one trembling finger. The fabric was synthetic, designed never to deteriorate, designed to outlast grief. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. Coffee sat cold in a mug 3 inches from her hand. She'd made it an hour ago. She couldn't remember drinking it. The kitchen door opened. Sophie appeared in her school uniform, backpack slung over one shoulder, her 8-year-old face brightening when she saw her mother home at this hour. "Mommy, why are you home? It's only 6 o'clock. You never come home when it's still light." Sophie's voice was high and guileless, the voice of a child who couldn't imagine anything being wrong with the world. Ashley looked at her daughter. She tried to speak. Her throat closed. She opened her mouth and nothing came out except a sound like wind through a canyon. Sophie's expression shifted, the light dimming. "Mommy." She came closer, dropping her backpack, and climbed into the chair beside her. "Are you sad?" "I?" Ashley's voice cracked. She couldn't finish. The flag sat between them like a confession, like proof of everything she was hiding. Sophie's eyes moved to it, then back to her mother's face. "Why do you have that?" Sophie asked. "You always keep that in your closet." "I?" Ashley's hands wouldn't stop shaking. She put them under the table so Sophie wouldn't see. It was already too late. Sophie was watching with the terrifying perception of children reading the signs adults try to hide. "I helped someone today, baby. Someone very sick. Someone I'd helped a long time ago. Did they get better?" Sophie's voice was small now, matching her mother's broken one. Ashley couldn't answer. The rule was simple and absolute: never tell her daughter the truth. Never tell her that Mommy wasn't really just a nurse. Never tell her about the women who never came home. Never tell her that the flag had been folded into this triangle at a funeral service in Fort Benning by soldiers with faces hard as stone. Never tell her that Mommy had been standing at the back of that chapel with her uniform on, her captain's bars reflecting the overhead lights, her hand steady as a surgical laser until everyone was gone, and then she'd collapsed in the bathroom and cried until she had no water left in her body. Sophie reached out and touched her mother's arm. Her small hand was warm. "Did something happen? Are you in trouble?" The question undid her. Ashley pulled her daughter against her chest and held her, breathing in the smell of her hair, apple shampoo from the grocery store, something innocent and real, and felt everything she'd built collapse at once. The false name. The safe job. The quiet apartment in a neighborhood where nobody asked questions. Dr. Pierce had dismantled it all in a single afternoon with his color-coded tabs and his frightened witnesses and his bureaucratic machinery that turned human beings into violations. She'd survived Helmand Province with shrapnel in her shoulder and a sucking chest wound that she'd packed with combat gauze and her own teeth clenched against shock. She'd triaged 12 soldiers with third-degree burns and traumatic amputations while rounds kicked up dust around her knees. She'd carried men twice her size through smoke-to-extraction helicopters while their blood soaked through her sleeves. She'd looked death in its face 100 times and never blinked. But this was different. This was slower. This was the kind of death that left the body alive but hollow, the kind that the military had ordained when they erased Captain Ashley Cooper from all records and ordered her to become someone else, someone smaller, someone who worked night shifts and asked permission and didn't know how to exist in sunlight anymore. Dr. Pierce's bureaucratic warfare was finishing what the Taliban couldn't. It was erasing her completely. Sophie fell asleep against her mother's chest at 7:33 p.m., exhausted by the stress of seeing her mother's careful composure crack like ice on a frozen river. Ashley carried her daughter upstairs and tucked her into bed, kissed her forehead, and stood in the doorway of the darkened room for 5 minutes, listening to her breathe, knowing that everything was about to change again. The termination email arrived at 8:17 p.m. She read it in her pajamas, laptop balanced on her knees on the couch, the screen glowing in the darkness. Dear Ms. Cooper, it is with regret that St. Michael's Medical Center must inform you that your employment is terminated effective immediately, due to gross violation of scope of practice protocol as documented in the attached incident report. Your access badge has been deactivated. Please return all hospital property by 5 p.m. on Thursday. Human Resources will contact you regarding your final paycheck and COBRA insurance information. Sincerely, Dr. Bernard Matthews, Chief of Staff. She closed the laptop. She sat in the dark. The living room was silent except for the hum of the air conditioning, the tick of the wall clock, the sound of a car passing on the street outside. She'd been invisible for so long that invisibility had become her natural state. Dr. Pierce hadn't destroyed her career, he destroyed the only thing that had made her visible again. For 8 months she'd been just a nurse, and for the first time since Bagram, she'd been able to pretend that was enough. Now she was invisible again. Back to being nobody. Back to being the ghost they'd ordered her to become. She picked up her phone to call the union rep, then realized she'd be defending the needle decompression, and they would ask her why she'd performed it, and she couldn't explain without saying things that were classified, without breaking her operational security, without confirming everything the military had ordered her to deny. She was trapped between two forms of erasure, lose her job or lose her freedom. The phone rang. Not a call. A text message, timestamp 11:36 p.m. from a number she didn't recognize, Captain Cooper, Hospital IT Director here. Something happened with the server logs. Need to show you. Not safe by email. Call the burner number on the encrypted message that just hit your Signal app. Ashley stared at the text. She should delete it. She should ignore it. She should keep running, keep hiding, keep the ghost alive. Instead, she opened Signal and found the message. An address. A time. 3 days later. 7 a.m. sharp. She was going to find out who Dr. Pierce really was, and what he didn't know was already in motion. What he didn't know was that the Veterans Administration had flagged his medical license for review. What he didn't know was that Captain Marcus Webb had survived, and his eyes, those eyes that had tracked her movement with confused familiarity, had finally placed her, had finally remembered the day outside Bagram when a woman with a captain's bars and a face like carved stone had carried him to safety under fire. The hospital board convened 3 days later in the executive conference room on the 14th floor, where the air conditioning hummed like a surgical saw and the mahogany table reflected fluorescent light like water. Dr. Pierce sat centered in his power, a leather portfolio open before him, each page a carefully constructed nail. He had built his case over 72 hours, false witness statements from staff he'd cultivated, incident reports written in bureaucratic language that made an emergency procedure sound like recklessness, performance reviews backdated to suggest a pattern of insubordination. His hands were steady as he presented, His voice carried the weight of institutional authority. The chief of staff listened with the expression of someone already convinced. 2 board members nodded along. And then the conference room doors opened. Orderlies wheeled in a patient on a psychiatric evaluation hold, a man with a face like a topographic map of violence, scarred from temple to jaw, his eyes the color of burnt iron. The board members looked confused. This wasn't on the agenda. The orderlies positioned the wheelchair near the side wall and stepped back, and the patient's eyes, those burnt iron eyes, locked directly on Ashley Cooper, who stood motionless against the back wall in full scrubs, her expression unchanged. The man's mouth moved. A single word emerged, barely audible, carrying the weight of 7 years and 2,000 miles, Valkyrie. The room went dead silent. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like insects trapped in glass. Dr. Pierce's hand froze above his portfolio. The chief of staff's pen stopped mid-note. What happened next didn't just silence the room. It ended careers. A Marine lieutenant in dress blue stepped forward, his uniform crisp as paper, his posture the kind that comes from standing watch over nation-states. He opened a leather folder containing a single official document, and his voice cut through the silence with the precision of a blade. Captain Ashley Cooper, Special Forces, 7th Group. Silver Star for Valor under direct fire, Helmand Province, 2016. Actions in contact. 12 lives saved. 2 of those lives were fellow service members. 1 was a civilian child. He paused, letting the word settle. According to the citation, she made 3 separate runs through active fire to extract wounded personnel when the main extraction vehicle was disabled. Another pause. That's not protocol violation. That's heroism. Dr. Pierce stood up, his face flushing from pale to crimson. This is irrelevant. She has no nursing credentials we can verify. The door opened again. A 2-star general in dress uniform entered the room, and every person seated rose to their feet as if pulled by invisible wires. The general was silver-haired, his face carved from decades of command decisions, and his eyes moved across the room until they found Ashley. He came to a full salute, fist to chest, the gesture of one warrior honoring another, and held it for 3 seconds while the board members stared in confusion. "Captain," he said, lowering his hand. "Your decorations." Dr. Pierce made a move toward the door. A Pentagon liaison in a dark suit blocked his path with the casual efficiency of someone who did this for a living. The liaison's voice was flat. "Federal, we've been following this case since Captain Cooper reported the incident." "The operation she was running at Bagram?" "Classified." "The team she led?" "Classified." "The fact that you've been accessing her personnel records without authorization?" "Federal crime." He let that hang. She was reassigned to the civilian sector for operational security. Her nursing credentials are genuine. Her military service is real. And your attempts to discredit her have been documented. The liaison pulled out his phone and made a gesture to the IT director, a Navy veteran who'd been standing silently in the corner with a laptop and a flash drive. The IT director plugged the drive into the conference room's projection screen. The lights dimmed. Security footage appeared, timestamp glowing in the lower corner, 23:22, 4 nights ago. Dr. Pierce in the server room, his keycard glowing red against the security pad. His hands were shaking as he logged into the archive system. The timestamp advanced, 23:51. He was accessing the ER camera backup now, his fingers moving across the keyboard with increasing desperation. Delete selected. Error, backup copy exists. The room watched his face on the screen as frustration twisted it. He tried again, 23:58. Hospital NAS drive. Failed, admin access required. And then, most damning, the footage showed him pulling a paper from his pocket, Ashley's home address, photographing it with his phone, then accessing her shift schedule. The IT director's voice was steady, every keystroke captured. Every deletion attempt logged. He was building a personal file on Captain Cooper's outside the hospital. That's stalking. That's HIPAA violation. That's destruction of evidence of a life-saving procedure. The paralyzed veteran's wife entered then, escorted by a hospital administrator. Marcus Webb's wife, her hands trembling in a way that was nothing like Captain Cooper's composure, her voice soft but carrying the weight of a mother whose child has a father breathing at home. "My husband is alive because of her," she said. "Your protocol would have killed him. I watched him turning blue. I watched him dying. And she saved him. That's not a violation. That's a miracle." She looked directly at Dr. Pierce. "My son asked me this morning when Dad could come home from rehab. Because of her. That's the only thing that matters." The Pentagon liaison added, his voice the kind that doesn't need volume because it carries institutional gravity. "We've reviewed Dr. Pierce's pattern of conduct toward military-trained personnel. 3 veterans reassigned or terminated in 18 months. Each time, rumors appeared first in the staff gossip chain. Each time, these rumors preceded documented complaints. This is a pattern of coordinated harassment." He paused. "1 victim. We might overlook as interpersonal conflict. 3 victims? That's a predatory pattern." Dr. Pierce's face went from crimson to the color of old ash. His jaw worked silently. He stood, and as he rose, his elbow caught his leather portfolio. It tumbled to the floor, pages scattering like confetti, false witness statements, backdated evaluations, all of it spreading across the conference room floor in a moment of stunning, undeniable chaos. He tried to leave. Security stepped forward, not aggressively, just a simple physical barrier. 2 officers in their 50s, both former military themselves, both seeing exactly what this was. The board chairman's voice was low and administrative, which made it somehow worse than any shouting could have been. "Dr. Pierce, you are suspended effective immediately pending investigation for evidence tampering, HIPAA violations, and harassment. You will surrender your hospital credentials today. Your medical license will be referred to the state licensing board. You may speak to hospital legal before you leave the building. Security will escort you to collect your personal items. You have 15 minutes. Not a request. A command." Dr. Pierce looked at Ashley one final time, searching her face for something, triumph, satisfaction, the gloating of someone who'd won. What he found instead was the same cold, flat stare from the hallway 3 days ago. A soldier who'd seen worse men fall harder. A woman whose composure didn't require his defeat to feel complete. She had never needed validation from his destruction. She had only needed to keep breathing, to keep saving lives, to keep her hand steady while his shook. In that moment, he understood he had never been fighting anyone. He'd been fighting ghosts. 6 months later, Ashley treated a 17-year-old girl's asthma attack in the campus health office at Denver Community College, administering 5 milligrams albuterol through a handheld nebulizer, watching the girl's oxygen saturation climb from 91 to 97% over 8 minutes. Through the window of the health office, she could see into the adjacent classroom where Dr. Pierce demonstrated chest compressions on a CPR mannequin. His hands pressed the dummy's sternum with mechanical precision, 100 compressions per minute, the rhythm of basic life support stripped of all ego. He was teaching for $18 per hour now, his medical license under permanent review, his reputation scattered like those papers on the conference room floor. His students listened politely. None of them knew he'd tried to destroy a woman who'd saved someone's life. He pressed the dummy's chest again, and for perhaps the first time in his career, he was finally doing something that required no authority, no status, no subordinates to dominate. Just hands that moved, lives that were saved, the purest form of medicine. He glanced up and saw Ashley watching through the window. His eyes went down immediately. Ashley returned to St. Michael's for her shift as the new emergency department clinical director, a promotion that came with the reinstatement decision and 18 months of back pay. In room 7, Marcus Webb was relearning to swallow, his paralysis still present but his lungs inflating on their own now, his diaphragm remembering how to breathe. The tattoo on his forearm showed her name, Cooper, above the date she carried him to the evacuation helicopter outside Bagram. His wife was there with coffee, real coffee, not the hospital swill, and his 8-year-old son was drawing pictures of fighter jets in the visitor's chair. When Ashley entered, Marcus raised his arm in greeting, that tattooed arm, muscles still weak but strong enough. His eyes didn't have the recognition they should have carried from Bagram. His memory of those days was fragmentary, scattered by shock and medication and survival. But he knew what her name meant. He knew that the woman standing in his doorway was the reason his wife hadn't had to plan a funeral. He knew that his son had his father. "How did you know what to do?" he asked. His voice was raspy from the breathing tube, but it was his voice, and it was asking. "How did you stay so calm?" Ashley moved to his bedside, and her hand went into her pocket, where she carried the folded flag, not large, not ceremonial, just a small piece of fabric that had belonged to someone who never made it home. She'd carried it every shift for 7 years, the weight of it lighter than air but heavier than mountains. "I've seen what happens when people give up," she said. "I've seen good soldiers go cold because someone decided protocol mattered more than breath. I won't be one of them. I can't be one of them." As she left Marcus's room, 3 new veteran nurses were beginning their orientation on the unit, a former Army medic, a former Navy corpsman, and a former Air Force trauma surgeon. Ashley had recruited all of them personally, had seen their histories in their files, and had known exactly what they could do. In the break room, they made space for her at the table. In the hallway, the chaplain, a former Army Ranger with scars on his hands that matched Ashley's own, nodded to her with recognition that needed no words. And outside the hospital windows, a helicopter passed overhead, its rotors cutting the Denver air into quarters. The sound was familiar as a heartbeat, the rhythm of survival, the proof that some people still came home. This time, when Ashley heard it, her hands didn't shake. They didn't tremble. They didn't betray her by showing fear or doubt. She simply counted the rotors out of habit, remembered the names of 3 people she couldn't save, and returned to the emergency department where a new patient was being wheeled through the doors. Her stethoscope hung around her neck like a medal. Her voice, when she spoke to the trauma team, carried the weight of command, the certainty of someone who'd done this under far worse conditions, in far darker places. The timid nurse from 6 months ago was gone completely. What remained was the soldier. What remained was the captain. And the ones who have seen the worst often give the most. If this story moved you, if you believe in recognizing the heroes who work without asking for recognition, subscribe to this channel. Like this video. Comment below with your thoughts on Captain Cooper's journey. And share this with someone who's been underestimated by someone who didn't know their real strength. Because the best heroes are the ones nobody sees coming.